Hello, all, and welcome. It is noon by me, 11, 12, 1, 2, depending on your time zone. But we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. I am Dr. Joanne Yanez. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Accredited Naturopathic Medical Colleges, and I welcome you today to Changing Careers, Pursue Your Passion, and Become an ND. Next slide, please. With us, just before we get started, a little bit of disclosures and housekeeping. This is just for educational purposes. It is not intended for continuing education. And just want to let you all know that, next slide, everyone is in listen only mode. And of course, my phone is ringing. And so please use the Q&A function. So take a moment and find Q&A in your Zoom toolbar. And then also the chat, please know that we prefer for you to use the Q&A. This way we can track the questions and make sure that all of your questions get answered. The forum is also being recorded. We will share the recording link once it is processed and ready. And if you run into any trouble, if you have any issues, please email us at info@aanmc.org. And with that, we're going to kick off the show. So the agenda for today is we'll be talking about the two alumni panelists who I have with me today. So we have Dr. Amy Tyler and Dr. Erin Westaway, and they're going to talk about their journeys to becoming an ND that maybe weren't so straightforward, and hopefully helping everyone here know that there are lots of different ways to get yourself to be an ND, and the path doesn't always have to look like someone else's path. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Next slide. Thank you. So Dr. Tyler did her undergraduate in chemical engineering, went to Bastyr University, and has a bunch of extracurriculars I'll let her talk about. Next slide. Dr. Westaway, conducted her undergraduate in arts and English literature, and also is a Bastyr grad. And so I'm going to do less talking and start talking to our panelists. So next slide, so we can get to some of the questions here. Go ahead, next slide. All right, so doctors, I would love to hear from you. We very often at AANMC hear from folks, and I know right now we've got 60 attendees in our event right now. But Angela and I hear from folks every week, literally, of, can I change careers? Can I, what does life look like if I was a professional before? How do I make this decision? This is a big decision, a big change in life. So can you describe the moment you knew that you wanted to be an ND, and how did you know it was the right choice for you? I don't know if one of you wants to take that and start.
I'll go. So for me, I think for everyone, it's a process. There's not necessarily one, moment that it culminates in. But for me, a big turning point was, and I was an engineer. I was working in Houston in the petrochemical industry. And it was very interesting, very challenging. And I did enjoy the work, but I was really interested in this personal journey of health and wellness and nutrition that I was on, in turn, to help with myself with certain things I was dealing with. And I had told my mom, who lived in Connecticut at the time, you should go see an ND, because she had chronic allergies, asthma. She had so many chronic health issues, and she's really struggling. And so she was kind of my guinea pig. And I do remember clearly the moment that she called me so excited, because her ND changed her life. And she, over time, got off all her medications. To this day, she's 76 years old, and she's like the poster child for naturopathic medicine. So for me, that was a big moment, because it was a personal connection to someone, obviously, that I care very much about, and seeing the transformation that she went through was one of those moments where you just know, obviously as an engineer, there's a lot of stuff going on up here, like the logical brain, but sometimes there's also like an intuitive knowing that goes with those big decisions. And for me, that was one of those moments that I really remember.
Thank you.
Mine was sort of similar, also a process, but I had actually struggled with a lot of health issues as a kid growing up, and when I was in college, my mom took me to a naturopath in Connecticut, actually, Amy. And I was in college in Maine. We drove 4 hours to see this doctor. I didn't even know she was a naturopath. She was just a doctor that did things differently. I didn't know what a naturopath even was. And we got there. She spent 3 hours with me. She looked at years worth of labs and she explained to me how what she saw in my lab work tracked with what I was experiencing, what that meant, what she thought was going on underneath it all, what we could do to change things. And I was like, that's it, I'm sold. I had wanted to be a doctor as a kid and had walked away from it because I felt like the conventional medical system wasn't helping me. So I did what she told me to do. And symptoms that I had dealt with, health problems that I've been dealing with for like almost 20 years, were 80% better in a couple of weeks. And I remember saying to her in her office, like, this is what I meant when I said as a kid that I wanted to be a doctor. And I just couldn't find what it looked like. And you just showed me what it looked like. And she just nodded her head because it wasn't well enough even at that time to do it. And she was just like, okay. But we worked on it and I got here.
Thank you. Next slide. So, yeah, I think, one of the things we also hear from a lot of students is the recognition you're an adult. You have a life already defined. You may have family and children and spouses and family responsibilities and so on. And the relocation challenge can be daunting for some, just re-envisioning what life looks like potentially in a different location. Is there anything that you would recommend for people making that or considering that transition to make it easier and less stressful and scary?
I don't think I did that well. Like that, I only gave myself a few weeks to settle into Washington. And so I was in Houston. I ended up spending a little time in Colorado before going to Washington State at Beth, to be in best year. And looking back, I should have arrived in the summer. The summers are gorgeous there, and given myself more of a chance to just settle into life there. At that point, I didn't have kids and I was single, so that part of it was easier. It was just me and my belongings. But I would have gone and even taken a summer class and gotten, comfortable with the school. I think that would be great. So I definitely recommend that to anyone who can do it. That would probably be the main thing that I would have done differently. In terms of, challenge wise, I guess I was back then more adventurous than I am now. So I didn't mind moving. I kind of like the adventure. It's a gorgeous place to live and, fun place to live. So I didn't find that actual relocation too challenging, but I do think, trying to connect with people who are there ahead of time, whether it's through the school or through family or friends, and just learning as much as you can. But definitely getting there early and trying to get involved before school starts.
I think, in a similar place. I didn't have a family or kids at the time. And so that gave me a lot more flexibility. And I did go out in the summer and take a summer class beforehand, which you're exactly right. It helped a lot. Because it's a slower pace and it's more relaxed. You get to know some of the other people a little bit more. So you kind of land a little bit gentler, I think. And I'm sure that the other schools do this too. I know when I went to Bastyr, they had like an online board where you could kind of connect with people in your incoming class to try, if you wanted to find someone to rent a house with or something like that. Obviously, if you're coming with your entire family, you're probably not looking for a roommate, but I did find that that was helpful for me. One thing that I would say to look for, depending on the school that you end up at, some of the schools, their academic campus and their clinical campus are not in the same location. So just, taking some time to get to know the areas before you figure out where you're going to live. Are you someone who is going to be open to moving, partway through? Or are you like, I have a family and we're putting kids in school, and so we want to land in one location for all of school and make sure that that's going to work for, through the clinical years. I think that's something that's just important to think through.
And Dr. Yanes, I see there's a question in the Q&A related to this question. Would you like to address that now or wait until?
Yeah, sure, we can. So the question, folks, is how did you go about the transition period? Did you end your prior career cold turkey? Did you work in various areas simultaneously?
So for me, it was cold turkey because I was with a giant corporation and there wasn't, I mean, some corporations might be more flexible now with so many more options for remote work and part-time work. At that time, there was none of that. And so it was just a goodbye. And I just, finished that phase and went on. So I did find school to be quite, it's very time and labor intensive. And so I don't think I would have had time to really work much and do school. So that was my experience.
Yeah, I was teaching public school beforehand, so that's sort of an all or nothing thing. So what I did do, because I hadn't done all of the prerequisites when I was in undergrad, so I needed to do a bunch of prerequisites before I could come. And so one or two of those I did in that summer session before, but most of them I did in the evenings or summer school when I was off from public school teaching. But then when it was time to start, I just had to stop and start.
Yep. And I will add, I think it does somewhat depend on the profession. When I was in naturopathic school, I worked myself as a student for about the first year. And many of my classmates also, depending on the field that they were in, I had classmates who were massage therapists who were able to maintain a very small massage practice, RNs who were able to pick up some extra shifts here and there. I had one classmate who was a flight attendant, and she had enough seniority that she could choose her flights and fly on the weekends and bring her books and study. So, I think it very much depends on the career, on the person, on your need to study, your requirements and so on, and other outside requirements of your time and your life, as to how you can balance all of that. I do think, though, Amy, to your point of the remote work situation, that remote work now does make it maybe a little bit easier for additional professions to be able to have some ability to make some money. However, I do want to be emphatic that this is a very full-time program, and do not bank on being able to work the whole time or even part of the time. I know for me, I recognize that working was taking too much of a toll on my health, and I needed to scale back on working while I was a student. So I think everyone does have different immune systems, different, abilities to manage and deal with stress and other things on your time. So I would just be mindful and to not anticipate being able to work, but if you are able to work, that's a bonus. There are also other ways of taking the program in longer periods. So you could do a 5-year track, or if you did want to or need to be able to work, there are ways of taking slightly lower course loads to be able to have a little bit more wiggle room in your day-to-day. I hope we answered your question there. Next slide. Okay. So what are some tips for creating a smart financial plan for med school? I don't know if one of you wants to take this.
I feel like I did this maybe after the fact. I can't honestly say that I did a great job of preparing this part of it. Again, I was in my 20s. I was a very different person than I am now. But my advice, knowing what I know now, would be there are financial advisors who specialize in student loans and student loan repayment. And I found one of those after I graduated, and it's been so helpful because they help you look at if if you are going to have student loans. I think the majority of ND students do. Then they can work with you to figure out how does that loan repayment process fit into the grand scheme of all the financial decisions, and it can be super helpful. And thankfully, I think right when I graduated in 2007 or 2008, there started to be much better options for student loan repayment that were income-based. And so that really relieved a lot of pressure from our profession and many other professions when it comes to paying back student loans.
I'll add to that. I agree. I didn't do a great job planning for that ahead of time. There are more opportunities for employment and stuff like that now, even than when I was in school, when graduating as a naturopath. But, and Joanne, you might be able to speak a little bit more to this. I think the majority of naturopaths are still self-employed. And so thinking about that, you know, is becoming a business person in some respects also part of something that you want to do or not. And, you know, there are ways, for example, looking at like if you need to do loans for school, looking at something like the public service loan forgiveness program, you know, there are lots of naturopaths who set up their clinics as nonprofits, which allows them to then be eligible for that program. But it's, you know, that takes some extra work and it's an extra process. So planning for things like that can be really helpful. You know, if you're able to save some ahead of time, or if you have a partner and you can take out a little bit less in loans, that's great too. Recognizing that if you're building a practice up from scratch, that can take time, right? So there might be a period of lower income. Are you planning on coming back home to a place where lots of people know you? And if so, can you get them excited about what you're doing beforehand so that they're, you know, ready to jump on board and become your patients, and your community is like, yes, you know, we want this service. What will that look like? Are there ways, you know, a lot of naturopaths now are starting to build up ways that they can have some passive income, some of which you don't have to have your degree to start doing, right? You can start building that structure and that scaffolding even beforehand. So I think thinking about it from the perspective of not just the healing arts of being a naturopathic doctor, but what is that going to look like from a business perspective can be really, really helpful ahead of time.
And one thing that I'll add, and these are all really good points, is that, you know, if you are a career changer and you are coming to this later in life, you probably have some life skills under your belt, and you know you've negotiated contracts or you know working relationships and things of that sort. So there are certain aspects where you come to the table already with some life skills. What I would say as far as a financial plan is that it is important to live like a student and to just be mindful of the expenses, the loans that you're racking up. You know, it can be tempting for people when they get their first loan check, like, oh, look, money. And remind yourself that all of that money is coming with interest, accruals and capitation and all the other bits and pieces of loans. So I always encourage people to have as much savings ahead of school as you can. Take out the bare minimum that you need to do school, and also recognize like we're in an inflation time right now. The cost of things that are, you know, costing you at year one may not be the same cost for year four. So plan for inflation, plan for costs increasing, because they always do, whether they're school costs or food or rent or what have you. You know, plan for emergencies, plan for health issues, you know, always have a little bit of a buffer so that if and when things do pop up in life, you're able to manage those well. But as far as the financial plan for school, I think you got some really solid advice here. And there are, you know, I know money can be very stressful for people, especially in this environment and with, you know, this big unknown of, well, what do I do afterwards? And so the more that you can be proactive, I've had on different doctors in the past who have met with financial advisors, especially if you come with property already, or, you know, prior loans or prior savings. Meeting with a financial planner can be very helpful to map out what your financial plan is. And so that would be another piece of guidance that I would share with you is, coming up with that financial plan is going to be very individualized. And so, possibly having somebody who is in your corner who knows your specific financial circumstances, responsibilities, and so on, and putting together something that makes sense for you. Okay, next slide.
Another thing I sometimes see people do is to if it works for their situation and they have the finances going in, is to actually buy a house where school is and take on some roommates. Maybe other naturopathic students who you want to study with or whatever, but it just provides a little bit of that buffer, which has helped them a lot. Not everyone can do that, I realize.
Very good point. So let's see. Next slide. So I know that there is very often we get questions from people who are parents regarding applying to medical school. And that is something I also think that is very personal. One thing as a parent myself, kids get sick, school still happens. So having layers, I call it your bench. Who is your childcare bench, and how deep does your bench go of support for your family, and being able to manage that. I had many classmates of mine. I had one classmate of mine who during school had 2 babies, not 1, but 2. She was a powerhouse and also had a very strong support network. So, I think that is the type of thing that can be helpful, whether it is a paid support network or a family support network, whatever that looks like for you, making sure that you've got a bench team of support lined up to assist you. That is one of the things that can really be helpful in creating stability for your family while you're going through a very rigorous program. Either of you want to add anything else there?
Yeah, and I wasn't a parent, but did have some friends going through the program who were, and I don't know what exists right now in terms of support the schools, but I would look into I don't know if there's any on-site childcare options, but if not, I would form a club with parents and get all the parents together. And that could be another way to create a network of support so that if, again, something happens or if school's canceled, all the things that happen when you're a parent. And that would be another case for getting to your location earlier and getting your kids situated. And I think that would be just extra reason to, arrive earlier, like summertime, as early as you can to relocate and all that.
And I think recognizing that there's, you get, especially when you get into your clinical portion of the program, you're going to be assigned different clinical shifts and you get some choice in that, but it's not like you get to pick every shift that you get. So there will be evening shifts, there will be Saturday shifts. And, is that something that's going to work with your family? You do get to make some requests, but I know when I was up last year, they did have on-site childcare. They had a room for nursing moms, which not like you had to go to this special room. You could nurse a baby in class if you wanted to, but sometimes you might have a toddler that you needed to have with you, and you could be in that room that was kind of separate and you could live stream watch a class. So just asking what sort of supports and scaffolding I think is huge, and recognizing that your schedule is probably going to change quarter to quarter, right? Just like being in any program. And so it can be a little bit, that's one of the challenges that I think I saw my friends who had kids during school struggle with, is that their childcare schedule, if they weren't using the on-site childcare, they had to have a childcare provider who could adjust their schedule every quarter. And just planning for that and being aware of that as you're going into it. And I think it depends wildly on the age of your children too, right? What kind of support do they need? How much of your attention do they need? Because you're going to be spending a lot of time studying when you're not in class also, and really making sure that you're planning for that as well. It's not just the class time.
Very good points. Next slide. So what are some advantages of being a career changer in ND school?
So for me, I remember, and I don't know who this person was because it was a stranger that I was talking to at a restaurant one day discussing this career change that I was contemplating. And I remember still, like I said, I don't know who that person was to this day, but I do remember what they told me. And they said, do you think that this would change the quality of your life if you went to this school and learned what you were going to learn? And that stuck with me. And I can say that that has been one of the biggest advantages for me is my own personal, health journey. And then everyone I care about, my family, my kids, my parents. I feel like there's been like a ripple effect from what I've learned and just the way that you live your life once you're an ND. And so to me, it also gave me a lifestyle that I wanted. One thing Dr. Westaway mentioned was you will possibly be a business owner or somehow more engaged as a business owner than you might have been in other careers. And for me, that was a plus because I'm pretty independent and I liked that aspect of it. And so that was another advantage, for me is I like having more autonomy and being in charge of what I do. So.
I feel like for me, there was a lot. I think I felt more kind of just confident and I was more mature than, when I walked out of undergrad. I had experience as a teacher, I had experience teaching, I had experience understanding other humans, and I'm sure that Amy, you could probably say there are ways in which your previous thinking and training informs how you think as a naturopath too. I would say the same is true. I feel like I think more broadly than I might have if I had only just studied that one thing, right? I have other experience and other knowledge that I can draw on, that I can make connections with, that I know informed my clinical practice and still does. And my patients would even talk about that, because as I was an English major in college and I taught arts and humanities, which you wouldn't necessarily think of as connected, but I bring story into my practice all the time. And it's one of the things that my clients find to be most potent in their transformation process. And I might have missed out on that if I hadn't done something else first. So I don't feel like it was a hindrance in any way. I feel like it has only supported what I'm doing.
Yes. And I interpreted that question differently. So by the first time I read it, it was what are the advantages of switching careers? But I see it was maybe intended as what advantage did you have going into naturopathic medical school with a previous career? So I'll answer it that way too. And for me, just like you were saying, Dr. Westaway, for me, I had a lot of like problem solving background of looking at something and trying to figure out what are the underlying factors. Like, why is this process when I was an engineer, why is it not working? Where are the bottlenecks? And so that translated really well into medicine because you're looking at these systems and very much more, complex systems with a human body, but very much there's a huge advantage to having been trained to look and inquire and be inquisitive and get stumped by hard problems, because you will get stumped by hard problems as a doctor.
Totally.
And so, yeah, so that was an advantage. And I think also just, having some of the, like Dr. Yanez was saying earlier, just having some life experience and some of that kind of practical knowledge of how the real world works is really helpful, because then when you get out, you're not completely feeling like this is the first time you've ever worked and you've been in school for, sometimes 9 years, depending on the path you take.
And I don't want to scare people there. It doesn't have to be 9 years.
Right, 8 or 9 years. I mean, for most with an
If
undergraduate.
you're with undergrad, yeah.
Yeah. Next slide. So what's your biggest advice for somebody wanting to take the leap?
So I would say my biggest advice would be talk to naturopathic doctors, reach out. A lot of NDs are happy to, talk to you on the phone, answer any questions you might have. I'd spend plenty of time, doing that myself. Just quick phone calls where you can ask the burning questions you have if we weren't able to answer them today. And visiting the schools can be really helpful too, if you can do that, if it's again within reach, or you can plan it into another trip. That can be really helpful. For me, that was kind of a turning moment as well in terms of seeing how things work and what they're learning. And I think that can be really helpful too. And then I think a lot of what you heard today is just planning, like looking at the finances, looking at the logistics, and just looking at everything as far ahead of time as possible so that it's, a smooth transition.
I would think too about what is it that you are hoping to get out of that change, right? What's the big goal there? And often when we have a goal, there's more than one way to meet that goal. And so really checking in with what is, if we want to make a shift, is the shift really about a lifestyle change like Dr. Tyler was talking about? Or is it about like, there's something in naturopathic medicine that I just have to dive into and know and study because I can't let go of that curiosity, right? That's very specific. Is it, that do you have an idea of what you would want it to look like in practice? Not that that can't change, but is that something that's, again, specific to naturopathic medicine? I definitely had classmates who, went back and forth between naturopathic medicine and acupuncture and nutrition and herbalism, right? There's a lot of overlapping things there. So the clearer you are on what your goal is, I think the more satisfied you're going to be in making the right choice for you. And I agree with everything Dr. Tyler said.
Thank you. Next slide. So let's talk careers for a little bit. How did you come up with the career you have now, and what are you thinking of for your future?
I'll jump in on that one because I'm sort of in transition at the moment in mine. I started out, I went to Bastyr, I graduated in 4 years. I did a 2-year residency program in essentially family practice. So I did that for almost 9 years. And then I opened a second business, which is a small supplement company, which provides some passive income and is a product that I'm really proud of and excited about. And so when I had kids and I started getting a little bit overwhelmed with all the things I was doing, I kind of pulled back and I shifted gears. And now I'm going more into the online space and working more in the world of, there are some I wanted to be able to reach more people. And so without being licensed as a naturopathic doctor in every single state, which we don't have licensure yet in every single state, and it's a little bit challenging to, hold a license in all of the states where we do have licenses. So I thought about where can I bring my experience and my knowledge where I can really help transform people's lives, but on a broader scale. And so I'm working currently building up a business around dealing with people with burnout and supporting people. And so I have to do that from the angle of a coach, right? So technically I'm coaching, but I'm bringing all of my knowledge and all of my experience as a naturopathic doctor to do that. And I just have to be careful in how I how I phrase things and what I'm doing and not doing. But that's what life is looking like for me right now. And it's very exciting.
Yeah, that's great. So I am in an unlicensed state. So that's another distinction I think to think about if you're going to go into the profession is we have, and you can find on the AANMC website, which states are licensed and which aren't. So I'm in Texas, which does not have licensure. I'm part of the team working on it. We're hoping to change that. And so for me, my role here is different. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not licensed to practice medicine. So my role is more of a health consultant in this state, which has worked for me because my favorite tools, education, teaching people about the lifestyle part and helping them with, herbs and supplements and all that. And just spending the time that they need to let their story unfold. A lot of that is where a lot of the healing occurs. And so So it hasn't been an obstacle for me to be in an unlicensed state. It's not for everyone though. Some people, some NDs after going through the training don't want that path. So that's something to think about and look ahead as well. But for me, I'm in a similar boat, I think, to Dr. Westaway, where the last few years, and I will say that, you know, I started off again, I was just me and I didn't have kids, and was just full-time working as part of a compounding pharmacy that also had practitioners. So it was like a wellness business. And I was with them for many years. And then I was part-time once my kids came along. And the last few years, I've also been venturing into the more digital space, and for the same reasons as Dr. Westaway, is to increase reach and to reach more people. And for me, it's been really fun, like the nerdy engineer part of me, to learn some of those tech skills and just to learn new skills and new software and that sort of thing. So I have, I created a game to help kids try new foods. I love working with kids, and especially kids that are wired differently. A lot of them have trouble, you know, with eating a diverse diet, which is really important, you know, for them to be healthy. So I did that. And I also am working on a course that's on the topic of nutrition for brain health for kids again. So that's the latest for me.
Thank you. Next slide. So we're going to jump into, and Angela and I have been trying to get to as many of the Q&A right now as we can, typing wise, and we're going to jump into some questions here for the panelists. But before we do, here is the contact information for both Dr. Tyler and Dr. Westaway. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. And we do have some upcoming events. I've been typing a few of these in the chat. Those of you who have asked about admissions, prerequisites, coming up with a plan, definitely the best thing for you would be to connect with an admissions counselor at one or more of the programs to start to come up with an academic plan for you. Make sure that you're not wasting your time on prerequisites you don't need, and so on. We will be hosting an event in March, on March 5th, with all of the admissions counselors from each of the member schools. So that would be a great place for you to just start to meet people, get some questions answered. Next month, we will also be hosting a webinar on heart failure with Dr. Decker-Weiss. But you know, we also have an archive of past events as well. So just wanted to put those at the top of your brain in case either of those events are of interest. Next slide. So if you have any additional questions for AANMC, here is our contact information. You know how to get a hold of us. So with that, we're going to start on a few questions here. So question number one, what type of work/volunteer experience, and I'm going to consolidate some of these questions, /ND shadowing, would you recommend students do before they apply?
I recommend looking for your local. Most states, I think almost every state has an ND organization, and you can usually just find it by searching online, and it's the state organization for the profession, and they will usually have a find an ND feature. And I would recommend either contacting the organization or individual NDs close to you and asking what opportunities they have. For me personally, when I was in person, I did that. I'm virtual now, so I don't offer it anymore, but it was something that I did for, 12 years and was happy to have people shadow. I think it is very important because you get a real look at what being an ND is going to look like.
And I would just add that recognizing that ND practices can vary widely in what they look like. So if you can find a few different people to shadow, I think that will give you a much better picture. If you just shadow one person, that's going to be one tiny window into this like huge, vast network of people and what that looks like. So I don't know that there's a specific work or volunteer thing that you need to do. The more you can get yourself comfortable with medical language, the better. So, even just volunteering in a hospital or something like that, where you're kind of just around that medical jargon and just hearing it and having it go in your ears. I know that my classmates who had never been around that struggled a lot more just to pick everything up as quickly as those who had just been exposed to it. It doesn't mean you have to have a job in it, but just that exposure can be really helpful.
Thank you so much. There's a question here, and I think one of the things we see with career changers is sometimes a little bit of a lack of confidence. If you've been out of school for a while, it can feel a little daunting to be going back to school. I've heard from folks thinking that they're too old, or am I going to be the weird old person in the corner of the classroom, and kind of having a lack of confidence. And so, can you talk to the competitiveness in admissions and just a little bit about kind of switching gears some?
NDs are so eclectic. We're like, we love everyone. Um, and you're gonna get a much, much wider range, I think, of people and experience and ages in most of the naturopathic programs than you are in a lot of graduate programs, or certainly than in a conventional medical program, for sure. I don't think it was weird at all. We had lots of career changers, lots of different ages, people at various stages of life. I think the question is, like, do you want to be spending a lot of time studying and sitting in a classroom? Because that can be a big shift, right? If you're used to being able to walk around all day long and, you can stand up in the back of the classroom. No one will think you're weird if you need to do that. But it just is a shift to go back to studying. I loved that personally because I'm a big nerd, but not everyone does.
Thank you. So there's a question, and I'm going to be skipping around with the questions. So I've seen all your questions. Don't worry about it. We're going to try do our best to get to them. But there's one I wanted you to cover if possible. Can you give us a snapshot in a day of your life? Like, what's a normal day in the work life of an ND?
That can look so different. I'll speak to more when I was in clinical practice because it looks so different now. But when I was in clinical practice, I would go in the morning. I would, I'd get up, I'd have breakfast, I'd go into work. I would pull up the labs to see any labs that had come in from the day before and just see if there was anything that needed addressing urgently with any of my clients that I needed to make sure that we called them that day. And then I would usually, check through my messages real fast, again, just to make sure there was nothing urgent. And then I would start seeing clients. I would usually see, I personally spent, I have always spent an hour with my clients, if not more, in every visit. And that's something that's pretty different, I think, than the conventional medical world. So I might only see 4 or 6 patients in a day. For acute stuff, maybe it was a little bit shorter, like if somebody just had a sore throat or pneumonia or something like that, often we could do that faster. I would have a variety of, when I was working in primary care, it was everything from, I was doing counseling, I was doing biofeedback, I was doing hands-on medicine, manual therapy. I was looking at, labs, what's going on with your cholesterol, do we need to order imaging, doing that kind of stuff. I'd take a lunch break. We tried to schedule an extra hour around lunch so that we had time to catch up on charting or any lab orders or things like that we needed to get in so that we weren't staying super late at night. And then, at the end of the day, I tried to close out all my charts and go home and walk away from it. But in primary care, I was on call a lot of the time too. So I had my phone with me most of the time, and people would call, not too often, but they would call in the middle of the night. They would call. So you don't necessarily walk away from it if you're doing actual primary care, but there are a lot of naturopathic doctors who are not on call because that's not how they set up their practice. It can vary so much. Dr. Tyler, do you want to speak to that a little bit? Because yours is probably different.
Yeah, and it's different being in an unlicensed state because there's certain things you're not doing. You're not doing physical exams, for example. However, I'd say one thing to consider, because NDs are so thorough, like most of us have these lengthy questionnaires because we want to know so much about the person that we're going to see. There is, I'd say for most, not for all, I do have some colleagues that really don't prep much. That's just not their workflow. But for me, I do spend a decent amount of time prepping before I see my clients so that I've read their intake forms, and it really makes it so that when I meet with them, I can give them my full attention and we can get the most out of the hour we spend together. So for me, it's also 60 to 90 minutes for an initial visit. And then follow-ups are ranging between sometimes 15 minutes if we have just a quick thing to review, sometimes up to an hour if we're doing something more extensive. And so, and then there are like finishing up, wrapping up charts, signing them off and all of that. So there's a pre and a post to seeing clients. And that is something to think about. It's just, you have to kind of figure out when you're going to do that. And for me, I just try to get it done the same calendar day, definitely within 24 hours, you know, seeing them. But there's again, workflow you have to think about. And so these days I just try to block, I do kind of back to back because I'm virtual now. And so I just see people consecutively and then I do all my charting. And the same thing, like around 6 people a day is enough because you're spending so much time with them, which I prefer. I'd rather, you know, dive deep with people. To me, that's part of why, you know, I chose this profession instead of something else.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had to find the unmute button on myself there. So there are a few questions that have come in about study tips, exam prep, examinations, like the board exam, the licensing examinations. Can you talk a little bit about getting yourself back into the study hustle and flow?
I think one really big thing is understanding how you learn. And, you know, and if you need help figuring that out beforehand, you know, maybe do some assessments or get some help or just, you know, have someone reflect with you. But the more you understand how you learn, then you'll be able to study in a way that makes sense for you. I don't know, Dr. Tyler, what year you graduated, but I went to school when not everyone was even taking notes on computers. So yeah, so I literally sat in a class with my textbooks and markers, and I did drawings and made notes in different colored markers in my textbooks and in a notebook, because that process of physically writing for me, and I'm a visual person as well, made a huge difference. So I made lots of drawings. I had butcher paper on my walls. I had whiteboard markers on my windows. Like I did things that were not necessarily like conventional study things, because I knew that for me, I needed to involve my hands and my body and that visual side of things. I also needed a study buddy to keep me accountable. And I found those people, and we met sometimes every day to go over things. When I was studying for boards, I would go for walks, again, for that kinesthetic thing. There were some things I just needed to do flashcards with. So I would take a chunk of flashcards on a walk, and I wouldn't come home until I knew all the things in that flashcard. I got some exercise in, you know, it helped my brain stay engaged and stay active. And that worked well for me, but everybody has to do it in the way that works for them.
Yeah, it sounds like we had very similar study styles. I graduated in 2007. So when I was in school, it was not like hardly anyone was there with a laptop taking notes. And I would have loved to have gone to school at a time when I could have done that, because I have terrible handwriting, and that was a hindrance to me. So I think, if you know, that's a big advantage of digital notes and sharing notes. And you know, if you miss something or miss a class because you're sick, I think it's going to be easier to get the information. I also funny with this topic, I just found this giant drawing I did of the digestive tract on butcher paper. I was cleaning out old files, and it's really amazing, all the detail in there. So yeah, and I think the thing is, the school prepares you, you know, for these exams. And if you are following along with the curriculum, and again, there's options for help, there's office hours, you're going to have a network of amazing people. You know, like Dr. Westaway said, NDs are very eclectic and very supportive. And so you're going to be surrounded by these amazing people that, you know, want you to succeed and are going to support you. And definitely, I consider myself to be more of an independent studier, but I needed to find those study buddies. And it was really, you know, a game changer to have people to bounce things off of.
I will add one thing in terms of the study buddy thing, because I had been an independent studier before this. There's so much to learn in terms of being able to think through the processes of the human body and how ideas connect. that one thing that really, really helped me was having someone to be able to ask me questions. And so, well, why do you think that? You know, get me from here to here, talk me through it. And that process, I think for me, worked way better than just a memorization process, because you're really engaging in that thought process. And a lot of people would study in groups too. I liked to just study with one person, but you know, if you are changing careers and maybe you have a family with kids, it can sometimes be easier to say, well, I have this meeting with this group at 6 o'clock, so I have to be there because they're counting on me and they're expecting me. As a mom, I think it can be sometimes hard. You can push your own stuff aside because your kid needs you, or the laundry needs doing, or whatever it is. But when you have that group, and they're expecting you to be there, you're going to show up. And so just knowing that about yourself.
There is always laundry.
Right?
One thing I will say, though, I think it also depends very much on the type of learner you are. I think one of you had mentioned that as well. Know how you study. I just last weekend ran into an old classmate of mine from school. I graduated almost 25 years ago now. But I will say that my friends were awesome in school and I always wanted to hang out with them, but that was not always the most efficient use of my time for myself. And so knowing how you study is so paramount. There are so many different assessment tools that you can take to learn. Are you a kinesthetic learner? Are you an auditory learner? You know, what memory tricks work for you or don't. And so I actually went the opposite way. I had to abandon the friends group because we were doing too much gabbing and talking and laughing and not enough studying. And so for me, and also knowing how to hack your productivity times. Like for me, it was first thing in the morning, like early. And, you know, where others were, I tried the late night stuff and like, that doesn't work so well for me. So knowing when you study well, what types of things you need in place, that those are all so important to make sure that you're using your time efficiently. And keeping your energy up, keeping your nutrition up, keeping your sleep going, you know, all of those other components that we talk about in naturopathic school and as in your life as an ND that are also really important to start to put in place to make it through school and have enough juice to get you to the end. So we are coming up toward the end of this seminar here today. I see the questions keep pouring in. We're doing our best to try and get through these as we can. Let's see here. So there's a little bit here regarding working in a pre-licensed state. I'm wondering, I can speak to that, but I'm wondering if one of you would like to as well. Just what does it mean to be a health coach? Can you have a successful practice? Can you, how do you get your client base and so on? And I have a little bit to add on that as well, but maybe one of you can start that off.
Well, as an ND in an unlicensed state, so like I mentioned before, there's some things you can't do. And you're not going to be contracting with insurance companies because that requires licensure. So most are, you're in a cash pay sort of situation where your clients, we don't call them patients, but clients are paying you, for your services directly, which there are some advantages to. So some NDs in licensed states are also choosing to be a cash-based practice just based on, just not wanting to deal with certain constrictions within the insurance and reimbursement system. So it really just depends, again, some of it's personal preference. I think I saw a question about why become an ND if you're just going to end up doing more of like a coaching sort of thing. And I guess the reason is there's a very deep level of education and understanding of the human body that you get when you go through the curriculum and become a naturopathic doctor. And it's because of that education that I can help people at the level that I help them. And if coaching certifications, not to, discredit them or knock them, but you're not going to become a doctor, right? So, and I know it might be confusing to say, well, you did this training as a doctor, but you're working more as a coach, but you can't unlearn what you've learned. And so you've trained your brain to, again, look at things, look at the big picture, connect the systems. And so I don't feel that I could do what I'm doing and offer the same level of help to people if I had become a health coach. The education would not have been as, I guess, in depth. And
So I can just speak to the bigger picture as somebody who gets the calls when things go badly. The level of education you get as a naturopathic physician is very extensive, and we often hear from the failed cases or the patients who have been harmed. I get those calls, unfortunately, and it's there is a lot of complexity to patient cases, to the types of medications that they're coming in with. I've been on, unfortunately, on the receiving end of calls of deaths, patient harm, and I'm not saying that there aren't some wonderful health coaches, but there sometimes is a boundary that is unsafe to cross, and you don't necessarily know, and have the breadth of education to understand what are the safe boundaries, when does coaching cross into diagnosis and treatment, or the delay of diagnosis and treatment, which often can play into things as well. It isn't even so much that you're giving bad advice, it's that the person is having a delay in the diagnosis of their cancer, or a delay in their diagnosis of asthma that causes them to have a fatal asthma attack. So there definitely are situations where there is a greater degree of care that's required. And one other thing that I'll add, in pre-licensed states, and having lived and worked in one myself, some people will go on and have another degree that is license eligible in that jurisdiction, so that they have the ability to bill insurance, they have the ability to have malpractice, and that is definitely a trend that has increased. And like you said, Amy, you can't take your brains away from you. The information that you learn in ND school always comes with you, and how you work with patients. And then there was a question regarding licensure. We are actively working on licensure across all 50 states. Licensure has more than doubled since I was, a student myself, and it continues to grow, as well as increasing the scope of practice in states that are already regulated. So there is a lot of momentum and movement going on across the US and Canada to increase our patients' access to naturopathic doctors. So with that, I know we're basically at the top of the hour here. There are a couple questions that just came in about NDs and MDs. There are no combined ND-MD programs. There is one bridge delivery program for foreign trained MDs, medical doctors, in Canada. There are also programs where MDs can get advanced standing, potentially, if you had an MD already, or a DO, or an advanced doctoral degree, a chiropractic degree, that you may qualify for some advanced standing within the ND programs. So that's definitely an option for people as well. But ultimately, it's, your education is going to be an investment in your future. And so what's the preferred future that you have for yourself, and how do you create education that helps you back into that? So with advanced, what does advanced standing mean? Oh, I see Angela's answering that. So with that, I know we've got to wrap up. We're at the top of the hour now. I just want to thank Doctors Tyler and Westaway so much for sharing your stories, sharing your journey, and hopefully taking a little bit of the angst out of this big life decision for so many people. So thank you both for sharing your energy and your time. I really appreciate you.
Thanks.
thank you for the